The boom began about 5 years ago, said Kathy Pelzer, a longtime high school counselor in an affluent part of Southern California. More students than ever were securing disability diagnoses, many seeking additional time on classwork and tests. A junior taking 3 or 4 advanced placement classes, who was stressed out and sleepless. A sophomore whose grades were slipping, causing his parents angst. Efforts to transfer the children to less difficult courses, Ms. Pelzer said, were often a non-starter for their parents, who instead turned to private practitioners to see whether a diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, perhaps, or anxiety or depression could explain the problem. Such psychological assessments can cost thousands of dollars, and are often not covered by insurance. For some families, the ultimate goal was extra time for classroom quizzes, essays, state achievement tests, AP exams, and ultimately the SAT and ACT. You'll get what you're looking for if you pay the $10,000, Ms. Pelzer said, citing the highest-priced evaluations. It's a complicated mess. From Weston, Connecticut, to Mercer Island, Washington, word has spread on parenting message boards and in the stands at home games. A federal disability designation known as a 504 plan can help struggling students improve their grades and test scores. But the plans are not doled out equitably across the United States. In the country's richest enclaves, where students already have greater access to private tutors and admissions coaches, the share of high school students with the designation is double the national average. In some communities, more than 1 in 10 students have 1 up to 7 times the rate nationwide, according to a New York Times analysis of federal data. In Weston, where the median household income is $220,000, the rate is 18%, 8 times that of Danbury, Connecticut, a city 30 minutes north. In Mercer Island, outside Seattle, where the median household income is $137,000, the number is 14%. That is about 6 times the rate of nearby Federal Way, Washington, where the median income is $65,000. Students in every zip code are dealing with anxiety, stress, and depression as academic competition grows ever more cutthroat. But the sharp disparity in accommodations raises the question of whether families in moneyed communities are taking advantage of the system, or whether they simply have the means to address a problem that less affluent families cannot. While experts say that known cases of outright fraud are rare, and that most disability diagnoses are obtained legitimately, there is little doubt that the process is vulnerable to abuse. Some of the learning differences exist in diagnostic gray areas that can make it difficult to determine whether a teenager is struggling because of parental and school pressure or because of a psychological impairment. And private mental health practitioners operate with limited oversight, either from school systems or from within their own professions. Many Americans got their first look at disability accommodations in the wake of the college admissions scandal, in which affluent parents were accused of hiring a consultant, William Singer, to cheat their children's way into prestigious universities through a variety of schemes. According to court papers, Mr. Singer directed families to a hand-picked psychologist in Los Angeles, telling one of his clients, a powerful Connecticut lawyer, that his daughter should be stupid during the psychologist's evaluation. The goal was for her to receive an accommodation that would enable her to take the act in a private room, before a proctor in his employ would correct her answer sheet. In a phone call recorded by the FBI, Mr. Singer assured the student's father that all the wealthy families were shopping for diagnoses. "The playing field is not fair," he said. In Washington, D.C., one mother said she had spent about $7,000 on neuropsychological evaluations for her son, now 17. She had little doubt that he needed extra help, but she acknowledged that her family had resources that others in similar situations did not. "It's totally unfair," said the mother, who works in political communications and asked not to be named because she wanted to keep her child's medical history private. "I know how to advocate for my kid. We made sure he got what he needed, and it wasn't always clear. We bring that privilege to the table." In early childhood, Her son had delays in speech, language, and fine motor skills, struggling to sound out words and hold a pencil. By middle school, he had ADHD and anxiety diagnoses. His charter high school gave him a 504 plan, which offered extra time on tests and the use of a keyboard to type answers and take notes in class. He was also able to avoid filling in bubble sheets. The 504 plans, which get their name from Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, are intended to help people who have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits learning or other activities. They offer students such accommodations as a seat at the front of the classroom or a private room for exams, free of distractions. One of the most common accommodations is extra time on classroom tests, which the two main college admissions testing companies, the College Board and ACT, look for when determining whether to grant students additional time for their exams. Many students struggle to complete standardized tests in the allotted minutes, and research has found that having more time can raise scores for students who have a decent grasp of the test material, whether or not they have a disability. The testing agencies also look for detailed diagnostic evaluations conducted within the last several years. The Washington student, who was thriving in his advanced classes, was repeatedly evaluated both by his public schools, for free, and by private practitioners hired by his parents, one of whom provided a 32-page report that the family and school submitted to ACT and the College Board. He got extended time on the ACT, and scored a 35 out of 36. The College Board allowed him to circle answers in his SAT booklet instead of filling in bubbles, but rejected his request for more time, even though his parents appealed the decision twice. He still scored a 1560 out of 1600, and will attend a Midwestern liberal arts college in the fall. In an analysis of Department of Education data, the Times looked at students with 504 designations at more than 11,000 high schools across the country. It did not include students who are served under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, a further-reaching program that can also offer extra testing time, but is generally meant for students more severely affected by disabilities. The Times found a glaring wealth gap in 504 designations. At high schools in the richest school districts, the top 1% as measured by census income data, 5.8% of students held a 504 plan, more than double the national average of 2.7%. Some wealthy districts had 504 rates of up to 18%. School income group. Students with a 504 plan. Average for all high schools. Top 1%. 5.8% of students. Top 20%. 3.9. 3.0. 60 to 80%. 40 to 60%. 2.3. 20 to 40%. 2.6. 2.1. Bottom 20%. Bottom 1%. 1.5. 2.7%. School income group. Students with a 504 plan. Average for all high schools. Top 1%. 5.8% of students. Top 20%. 3.9. 3.0. 60 to 80%. 40 to 60%. 2.3. 2.6. 20 to 40%. 2.1. Bottom 20%. Bottom 1%. 1.5. 2.7%. School income group. Students with a 504 plan. Average for all high schools. Top 1%. 5.8%. Top 20%. 3.9. 3.0. 60 to 80%. 40 to 60%. 2.3. 2.6. 20 to 40%. 2.1. Bottom 20%. Bottom 1%. 1.5. 2.7%. Note, income groups reflect a ranking of schools by the median household income of each school's district. Schools that self-identified as charter, magnet, alternative or special education schools, and those with fewer than 200 students, are not included. The 504 plan data is from the 2015-16 school year. Sources: Department of Education, Census Bureau. By the New York Times. There were also racial disparities, the Times found. A larger percentage of white students held a 504 plan than students of any other race. The Cleveland Metropolitan School District, one of the poorest in the country, had a 504 rate of less than 1%, though a fifth of the district's students had disabilities with needs that were generally too severe to be covered solely by 504 accommodations, said Jessica Baldwin, the district's executive director of intervention services. The impact of poverty can't be understated here, Ms. Baldwin said. Federal disability data does not include private schools. But in some areas, like Manhattan and the west side of Los Angeles, private school students are even more likely than affluent public school students to use disability diagnoses to qualify for extended testing time, according to research and interviews with school workers. Some private schools help smooth the process. One mother in Montgomery County, MD, said that when she transferred her son, who has ADHD and a reading disability, from a public high school to a private one that charges $45,000 per year in tuition, the staff at the new school told her about ACT accommodations she had not known about. Her son scored a 33 after taking the exam over multiple days, and is now considering applying to Ivy League schools. In communities where these accommodations have become commonplace, public and private school officials often declined to speak about them in detail, or said they were simply following federal law. In Mercer Island, Washington, Craig Deginger, a school district spokesman, said officials were concerned about the system's high 504 rate, and were working to bring it in line with regional and national averages. We strive to appropriately identify students who truly need supports, he said in an email. Ms. Pelzer, the California high school counselor, had more than 2 decades of experience in her profession before retiring this year. The share of students with 504 plans in her district, Capistrano Unified, in Orange County, has tripled since the 2013-14 school year, accounting for about 1,000 more students, according to district data. Ms. Pelzer said that determining whether a child is disabled or simply struggling with academic and social pressure is not as objective as it appears. Federal law states that K-12 schools have the right to decide whether a student qualifies for disability services, and that school officials who are skeptical about a diagnosis from a private practitioner can have a student reassessed. But that can be costly, and can lead to legal battles with parents who have the means to hire a lawyer. Ms. Pelzer said the frenzy over college applications was a major cause of the growth in disability diagnoses. It's the competitiveness and wanting to get the edge, she said. Private admissions consultants, she added, recommend that parents seek out diagnoses, and word gets out. Online message boards are another wellspring for tips. On one serving the Capital Region, D.C. Urban Moms and Dads, a parent inquired in January about how to get accommodations for a 10th grader with a 3.6 grade point average who received an ADHD diagnosis in elementary school but was denied a 504 plan. We started thinking ahead to junior year and beyond when the coursework will undoubtedly get harder, the parent wrote. Several respondents said a new neuropsychological evaluation would be well worth the expense, and some suggested having one done regularly. We got a new EdPsych every 3 to 4 years, one parent wrote. Another said an evaluation may also be useful if you seek extended time on standardized tests. Demand for extra time on college entrance exams has swelled since 2003, when the College Board and ACT stopped notifying admissions offices of whether a student had taken a test with accommodations, in part to ease the stigma against disabled students. The College Board said that in recent years 4% of the roughly 2 million students who take the SAT each year used accommodations, up from 2% in 2002. According to ACT, 5% of the 2 million test takers in the high school class of 2017 used extended time. The company said it had not tracked how the percentage had changed since the early 2000s. Both testing agencies are required by federal guidelines to defer to recommendations from qualified professionals, like psychologists, when granting accommodations. But not having an up-to-date evaluation can hurt a student's chances. Melanie McDaniel, 21, was in the 4th grade in San Antonio when her parents learned she had ADHD. By her junior year of high school, she was struggling so much during tests that at the sound of a pencil dropping, she said, "My head would be spinning." Her school gave her a 504 plan that offered her extra time on exams. But when Ms. McDaniel applied for more time to take the SAT, she was rejected. Her parents never got a concrete reason, but her ADHD evaluation was 7 years old and did not include a full battery of assessments. Reapplying with a new evaluation would have been a stretch for her middle-class parents. "My mom said we couldn't afford it because it cost thousands of dollars," Ms. McDaniel said. She ended up focusing her college applications on the growing number of schools that do not require SAT scores. Get ACT extra time, reads one blunt web advertisement from the Cognitive Assessment Group. 35+ years of accurate testing. The Manhattan-based practice behind the ad is run by Wilfred Van Gorp, a psychologist with an unusual history. He once testified that the Genovese crime boss Vincent Gigante was mentally impaired, years before Mr. Gigante admitted that he had feigned his mental illness. Drive Van Gorp said he had been tricked. In his current practice, Drive Van Gorp assesses 20 to 24 patients a month, he said, 2 or 3 of whom are high school students seeking a diagnosis before they sit for standardized tests. The appointments cost about $6,000 and are often not covered by insurance, though he said he provided financial assistance to some patients. In one 14-minute test that Drive Van Gorp administers on a computer, letters pop up at varying intervals, and students must press a button whenever they see a letter that is not X. In an assessment of working memory, students must repeat strings of numbers forward and backward. While abnormal scores on these tests, as well as a history of symptoms in early childhood, may lead to an ADHD diagnosis, Drive Van Gorp said he also had the discretion to give a diagnosis to a patient with normal scores if he observed signs of inattention, like constant fidgeting. About 70% of the patients he sees leave with a diagnosis, he said, and testing agencies usually approve accommodations for them. He acknowledged that some patients arrive with information about the assessment process, gleaned from internet research. But he said he tried to screen out cheating through tests of effort and motivation. "The ability to rehearse for assessments is a concern both of mine and the field in general," he said. Lori Ann Ness, a psychologist in Silver Spring, MD, outside Washington, sees teenagers who are working 300% harder than their peers to keep their heads above water, she said. "Their tears are real. Their pain is real." Dr. Ness begins the diagnosis process by interviewing the student and the parents about the child's behavioral and educational history. Only then does she conduct 8 to 10 hours of tests, over the course of several appointments. The cost, about $3,000, is sometimes partly covered by insurance. She said she has occasionally met parents who were looking for a diagnosis for a child who did not seem to need one. Such parents often pay for testing just to make sure, Dr. Ness said, but she will not offer a diagnosis that is not warranted. Like several psychologists interviewed across the country in the wake of the college scandal, Dr. Ness said some practitioners conduct rushed assessments that could result in a misdiagnosis. "There is some really bad, sketchy stuff out there, and schools are right to be skeptical," she said. In the college admissions fraud case, the government is not investigating any psychologists to whom Mr. Singer referred clients, according to a person with knowledge of the investigation, who requested anonymity because of the sensitivity of the case. The American Psychological Association said it was not aware of any widespread, systemic abuse of the systems for diagnosing learning differences or recommending testing accommodations. Ultimately, the disparities in the system may come down to cost and access. Some experts called into question the assumption that speed is an important element of intelligence or ability and have argued that admissions tests would be fairer if all students were given the option of more time. Rachel Fish, an assistant professor of special education at New York University, said it was difficult to determine whether wealthy and white students were being overdiagnosed with conditions such as ADHD and anxiety, or whether poor students and children of color were being underdiagnosed. It's different levels of advantage in being able to acquire services, she said.